Welcome, listeners, to another enlightening episode of Who Made You the Boss? Today with my friend and the wonderful Samara Bay. This woman is a powerhouse, you guys. She is not just the author of Permission to Speak, How to Change What Power Sounds Like, starting with you, but behind the scenes, she is the go-to coach for individuals who are on the brink of a new era of leadership, from celebrities to politicians, and she's teaching them how to use their voices for the better. And listeners, she does that for us today too. She teaches us not just how to use our own voices, but how to instill that kind of confidence in our children, to teach them to begin to observe and unpack the way they use theirs and how they lead this next generation. Guys, today's episode is it is so good. I just love it. So let's dive right into this conversation with the absolutely incredible Samara Bay. Samara Bay, I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Why, thank you.
I feel like I'm fangirling, but I know you, so am I still allowed to fangirl? Is this,
I mean, why don't we mutually fangirl? That feels very right.
Yes, I'm so excited because we've now been able to have some fun conversations, and I've been able to get to know you better. And I'm just so thrilled to kind of go deeper in that. And really what I want to start with, the audience knows a little bit about your background, but you have such a wonderful storied career already with Hollywood celebrities and rising leaders and young politicians, and really teaching people kind of how they articulate themselves in different ways. And I just want to hear a little bit more about the path that has shaped you to becoming that authority figure in this communication space.
Oh, I love that. Also, your use of the word articulate. It's not articulate like we have to be articulate, right? Because people have drama around that. And I don't want to be the one being like, yes, you must sound articulate. But how we articulate is actually like when you think of like a dancer articulating, it's like how you move your small parts, the parts of our life that are the connective parts. How we move ourselves in space. Yeah. Vocally, as well as with our bodies. I love that. I have this background, as you said, as a dialect coach in Hollywood. And I've always, always, always been interested in deeper questions than just accent and sound. But I didn't really know how that was going to manifest until this wild moment in the summer of 2018. I was in Washington, D.C. I was coaching Gal Gadot on Wonder Woman 2. And, I like to joke that I have this background teaching movie stars what to do with their tongues. It's like, it is that minimal of work. It's hilarious, but it's also, there's a lot of hang time. And there's a lot of, especially when English is their second language, and this is not just Gal, it's a lot of Hollywood people. They're big old movie stars. They, in certain ways, are like our cultural epitome of success. And yet, when it comes to their voice, when it comes to how they present, and specifically how they expect that they're going to be perceived, it can get really drama-y. The amount of insecurity that really successful people have when it comes to being seen and heard in public. And so as a role, sure, right? I mean, I was coaching her on really this like out of date term accent reduction, which really just means like if English is your second language and there's some vowel sounds in American English that you don't have as easy access to, like we help you open those up so that American ears can hear you. But it was also always this deeper stuff of like, okay, but how do you like breathe like a person who deserves to be there? And right in the middle of that summer, when quite frankly, I had very little to do, because I don't know if anyone's seen Wonder Woman 2, but she flies a lot. And especially the whole DC component, it was like all stunt work. And I was like over on the side with my little earphones in, being like, she's not making any sounds because she's up in the air and they're not even miking her. So why am I here? And it was a very politically fraught summer, right? We were 2 years into that former president's term. We were heading towards our first midterm. There were all these first-time candidates who were running, but we also, just to bring everyone back and like trigger warning, but that was the summer that we were starting to see the pictures of the kids at the border being separated from their families. And I just felt like not just me, but like every activist I knew was sort of shell-shocked and like fritzed out. And that's terrifying in itself, right? Because if like the helpers aren't going to be the helpers, like who's left, Mr. Rogers? And it was not lost on me that I was coaching about, on this project about a like made up perfect heroine who comes in and saves the day. And then here we all were being like, but like, where's that person? And in the middle of that, I got this call. I was in DC. I got this call from moveon.org, and a friend had put me up for this. And they were just asking if I could join a group of coaches who, for free, were coaching first-time candidates for office over Zoom. I mean, like super unglamorous, but also like, if you're available, we've got someone for you tomorrow. And I was like, yeah, please. I don't know if I'm going to be good at this, but as I like to say, I'm not going to make them worse.
that was, I think you told me that we met. I love that line.
So that changed my life.
Yeah.
That changed my life. And I still did set stuff for a little while after that. But I sold a podcast and then I sold a book. And what I learned from coaching those women, first of all, they are the Wonder Women. Like, that's the answer. And second of all, that so many, and I'm speaking to you and me and all of you listening, so many magnificent people. Sometimes I specifically say women, but quite honestly, there's so many of us who aren't totally confident in how we talk when we're being seen.
Mm-hmm.
So many magnificent people have trouble showing up magnificently in the moments that matter.
Yeah.
To pitch that idea to the VCs, right? Or to pitch themselves into a microphone in front of all these would-be constituents. How do you show up as magnificently as you actually are? And I realized that summer, like, I can help unlock that.
Absolutely. But take it back to even what made you realize that you could help anyone unlock anything regarding to speaking is you lost your voice for a period of time, right?
Yeah, I think that was less about that was less about me thinking of myself, in an expert capacity and more thinking of myself as a, victim, I guess, quote unquote, but specifically because there was such an element of shame around that. And I think that connects me to almost all of my clients, because so many of us just have really mean voices in our head around how we talk. So when I was in my early 20s, you're referencing something I talk about in the intro of the book. In my early 20s, I was in the middle of an acting program. Terrible timing. I lost my voice and I wasn't sick. And it came off really over many months. And it was just deeply painful to talk. And so finally I just stopped and kept going to class, but like everybody ignored me because when you don't talk, no one looks to you for comment. And I dropped out of the play and I finally got myself to an ear, nose, and throat doctor. And they stuck this little scope, a little camera up my nose and down the back of my throat. Not a feeling you forget. And I got a photo of my vocal cords. And I learned from this image that I had growing blisters on both sides of the little V of my vocal cords. And anybody listening who has this, you know where I'm going with this, vocal nodules. So it's like not quite at the, I'm Adele and I need surgery, but it's like something's got to give or I will. It's like when you rake a lawn for an hour and the calluses start to build, but they're not like calloused yet. Mm. And I went back to class that day after I'd missed the morning session to go see this doctor. And the guy who ran the entire acting program in front of everybody stopped class and said, "So, what's the diagnosis?" And I was like, barely able to talk, but I pushed through as audibly as I could. And I said, vocal nodules. I have to go on vocal rest for a month. And he said, yeah, just as I thought. Bad usage.
Bad usage.
Right. So it's like so weird. It's not even a phrase. What does that even exactly? But you know what? You know what I felt?
Yeah.
That ball of shame.
Yeah, shame. Of course.
Right? Like that. Yeah. Who cares what the words are, right?
Please,
what he clearly was saying
Mr.
was,
tell me what I've done wrong.
Exactly. He's like, totally, you're the victim. We see it. Wow, what an injury. So sorry. You're also the perpetrator. You did this to yourself. Mm. Mm-hmm. That's what I got there. And I was like, I took that month. It was perfectly timed really around Christmas break. I went back home. I stayed with my parents and I found a speech pathologist and she like literally retaught me how to speak. And the nodules went away and like voila. But all that happened in like a month and a half. But that shame ball that he threw me, that stuck around. And I didn't even realize until I was like nearly done writing this book. I wrote the intro at the end, that it's the book that I wished I'd had at 24. Because I was like, that idea of self-sabotage, that I did this to myself. I didn't know where to turn to process
right.
that.
What do you do with that?
But, and I say that because like for all of us who've ever been told, even by like a really well-meaning mentor, you're never going to get taken seriously if you keep saying like so much. Or do you notice how much you say and
Yeah.
or, you know, whatever, all of these little comments, sometimes they're even meaner than that, right? You sound annoying. Your laugh is weird, right? All these things, your voice is high pitched, your voice is low pitched. Oh my God, are you a man? All the things we've heard. And those were just the ones for women, but like fill in the gaps, right? Anybody listening, like just take a moment and love on the fact that you have probably accumulated a bunch of tiny little offhanded comments that have played an outsized influence in your mind on what you should be doing, what you're doing wrong, what you should be doing if you want to quote unquote get taken seriously.
Yes. Well, and I mean, the entire premise of the book, which side note, I'm not just saying this, and this is why it came up in conversation with Jackie Gifford. This is so funny. We were talking about books that we love this year. This is on an interview that will air probably before this one. Yay. And I brag on you all the time because I just loved your book and I loved, hanging out. And I was like, oh, you didn't read this one. And she was like, oh, I know, Samara. But it truly was such a great book because of the entire premise. It's not just about the voice and what it was your idea that when we change the story of what power sounds like, then we change who has the power. I mean, tell us more about this.
Yeah,
you can snap for it. It's yours. I took it straight from the book. I've written down.
But you're good. I appreciate it so much. Yeah, you know what I realized when I was coaching those women in 2018 was partly that, put me in front of them and they get better. I really did learn that, which was like cool.
Yeah.
But the other thing I learned is that, why is it so hard? Why do we feel like our voice is a site of insecurity for almost all of us? Well, because there is this standard of what a powerful person is supposed to sound like. And it's invisible because high voices are invisible. Spoiler alert. So no one like teaches us there's a standard and you have to either chase the standard or stand out and be different. No one says this. But I realized this as I was listening to these women because the assumption is I sound different, so I sound wrong. So if I have an accent or if I'm soft-spoken or if I'm more roundabout in how I talk instead of direct, or if I go up at the end of my sentences, or if I say like sometimes, these are all markers of feminine speech or of accented speech, right? Or linguists would call it like class-based or race-based markers. So, well, then what's the standard? None of those. Okay, cool. So the way that like racism and, sexism plays out is all the ways we can name, and also that there is this voice standard where if you want to get taken seriously, quote unquote, right? If you want to sound like leadership has traditionally sounded, you should fill in the blank. And by the way, fill in the blank, if you Google right now, how do I sound more authoritative? Which clearly many people must have done, because if you put that into Google instantly, like Google does, you get such helpful advice. It's like 5 bullet points. It's literally keep the pitch of your voice low. Don't talk like this. Talk like this. By the way, how'd I get vocal nodules? Oh my God, because I started talking low. Because like at some point in my late teens or early 20s, I must have picked up this habit of sounding a little tiny bit below my body's quote unquote optimum pitch. So I wasn't like full Elizabeth Holmes. I didn't know I was doing something, but my anatomy did. It was like, hey, that's not actually going to work out in the long term.
Yeah.
But it worked out in the short term because when you pitch your voice a little low, people take you seriously.
Yes.
So there are these quick fixes for somebody to get taken seriously. And what I'm here to do is say, I don't think that all of us, women, people of color, queer folks, immigrants, anybody who feels like they talk different, if we are just going to endlessly try to chase that standard, we're going to endlessly keep ourselves out of joy, quite honestly,
Mm,
out of
right.
centering that how we sound is right and how we sound is the reflection of the life we've actually lived. And that's what our people need.
Yeah.
And it's a big leap, right? Because it may mean that people who are listening to us do go, ooh, quick biased decision of like, oh, they have an accent, I don't take them seriously. Yeah, that's possible. So there's some like cultural learning to be done on what voice bias is. And then there's also just inner work we get to do of like, let me take the gamble. It isn't a zero sum game. I either show up more like myself or I get taken seriously. No. There is this third way, which is I show up like myself with such a sense of permission, such a sense of like inner confidence that comes from like knowing you deserve to take up time and space and that your weird ideas are good, that people listen. And when you show up emotionally available instead of this, standard of sort of stoic, is when people trust you
Mm-hmm.
and is the only way actually that we can all make any impact.
Right. But we all have to be educated on it because we all have to understand our implicit bias toward not trusting when we hear those voices.
Totally.
And I would
Because the
love
bias is not just out, but in, right? We are not just dismissing other people, we're dismissing ourselves.
completely. That's why it was such a great book, because it made you reflect in both directions and suddenly realize, I didn't even know there was such a thing as voice bias. And wow, does it permeate?
I'm like, why do I care about the voice? Well, not because I care about the sounds coming out of any of our mouths. It's our relationship to those sounds that ends up affecting literally whether or not we go for our dreams and change the world right where we are or not.
Yeah.
Well, in massive ways.
It makes you sit back and think too, or made me sit back and think at least on the moments that I have done it myself, right? As I climb in any sort of position of leadership or a position of power by running my own company or interestingly enough, I think I almost have two different voices here of, am I in a position of leadership and talking in a certain way, or am I speaking to a client, in which case I'm in a position of servitude and talking in another way? And you note about this, that women, just when we want to come across as nice, we raise our voices even higher. We sound a little bit sweeter. I will never forget being on a phone call with a client. I was driving down the road with my husband, who was just my boyfriend at the time. And I remember after I got off the phone call, this is the first time he had ever heard me talk to a client. He goes, "That wasn't your laugh." And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?"
Ooh.
"That wasn't your laugh." And then he started referring to this as my client voice. Because apparently, unbeknownst to me, there is a different way I would deliver to sound nice. And don't you want to trust me? And I would love to help you with that. It's like Disney princess style, right? Like it was just a different voice.
Yeah. Well, and so, I mean, beautiful observation. And thank you for, like this is all part of our voice stories. Like we all have a story about like an ongoing story about our relationship to our voice that starts when we're little, and it includes all those comments people make, and then the sort of the truisms that we believe about how we come across, right? But I also want to honor that like we're allowed to sound different ways in different contexts. I think there's like a cultural myth that we have one authentic voice and everything else is fake.
Okay.
And so instead, I want to offer what a linguist would say, which is that every habit any of us have ever picked up vocally, including how to talk to clients, we have picked up because it works or because it has worked in the past. And this is part of, honestly, my anti-shame campaign, because we can go, oh, why do I do that? What's wrong with me? Me, right? Instead of taking a second, okay, maybe I want to change that habit or maybe I won't, right? That's an interesting thing. But before that, just celebrate like how resilient we are. We picked up so many habits to be unintimidating because they worked, because people with more power around us needed us to do that in order to keep us close.
But where do you draw the line? And I do appreciate that. I appreciate the permission to have grace and to also recognize, well, yeah, I mean, I built a business on it, right? So it did work. But where do you draw the line between being unintimidating and people pleasing?
They're connected. They're totally connected.
Okay. So
I think actually it's less about drawing that line and more about drawing the line of, okay, but when do I want to switch into something that feels more powerful, where I'm now not trying to have the proximal power, as they say, of keeping the people in power happy, but actually deciding I'm that person.
It's my time.
Power, which is obviously connected to the spirit of this podcast, right? And for many of us, it's like there is this moment. I think it's often the moment that people pick up my book, or that like a conversation like this really resonates. It's this moment where there's a little kernel of fury. There's a little, I'm sick of this. And the I'm sick of this is what? Like, it's the world, it's you, it's who knows. But that sense of like, I'm going to now name that I'm eyeing power in a different way.
Mm.
I'm going to be a different kind of leader, or I'm going to go after that promotion from the point of view of I'm beyond deserving of this, rather than if you please, would you please?
Yeah.
And that shift that happens is like, I mean, we use this phrase in our culture of stepping into your power, right? It's so abstract. I kind of never use it because it just feels like one of those cliches. But there is this like energetic shift, which I think is like what my book is about. And so that can happen when you're getting out of high school. That can happen when you're getting out of college. That can happen when you're in a career shift. That can happen when you're in your 40s and you have a kid and you're back to work in a different way, right? But like what they all have in common is some sort of an up-level transitioning moment where you're just like, the old way of me, my old way of being isn't working for me. It's not in my best interest. It was, but it's not anymore.
I love those types of moments because I feel like a lot of times we fear them to begin with, right? We think of the way that our life is going to transform when I actually, working title for my manuscript is The Monsters That Save Us, right? It's the idea that the thing that's hiding in the closet, the thing that we are so terrified of, when it actually happens, it refines us and kind of delivers us to who we're supposed to be. And I feel like that's exactly what you're talking about. When you have that shift, sometimes it's as imperceptible as actually just picking up a book and reading it and realizing, oh, I've been doing that. But sometimes it is the life-altering situation that causes it, right? Like that's why I even
like getting fired from a job where you were doing everything right. And you're like, well, if that's not going to pay off, what is?
Yeah. But it's also the losing your voice. Like you had that pivotal moment, early 20s, and realized, wait a minute, something is here. Like that, like everything I knew before this has to change.
Totally. And yet it was also a growing realization, because at first it was just like, there was a me element of like, why me? Why am I not normal? And then I started to talk about it, so there is a lesson in here for me, for all of us, of many times when we feel really weird. Why am I such a weirdo? Why can't I hack it? Right? All the things we associate with imposter syndrome. Yes. Often it's because we've accidentally thought we've like, drunk the cultural Kool-Aid that we're the only one. Mm-hmm. And I think we know, every self-help book out there is basically out there to say you're not alone.
Totally. It's why I started this podcast. I want the conversation to exist of when you look in the mirror and sometimes have that little gremlin that says like, who made you the boss? I want you to be able to say with confidence, me, I took the reins here. And I'm very happy with that. But you just mentioned imposter syndrome, which comes up a lot because I feel like that is when I think of like the modern multiple horsemen of like professional challenges these days, right? Like it's imposter syndrome, it's burnout, it's people pleasing. It's the things that we kind of deal with and oftentimes don't necessarily dive deeper into. And so I want to actually camp out on imposter syndrome because you actually touch on this in your book too. I remember you mentioning that it strikes everyone differently. And when it strikes you, it makes you claustrophobic. And I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I feel like one of the things that I've noticed about myself and that I often bring to clients actually is if you think about, okay, here's an exercise, right? Do this however you want. I'm not giving you homework. There's no accountability. But if you want it, there's an exercise where you can think about for a moment, maybe light a candle, wiggle it out, right? Like get your body into a place where you can kind of go there emotionally and think about what you tend to think and feel and do when you feel powerless or like a victim. What do you tend to think, right? What are the kinds of thoughts that tend to go through your head? What do you tend to feel? Where does it happen in your body? And what do you tend to do, right? Do you like close everybody out? Do you call a friend or that's like impossible because it just feels like, you just need to go under the covers and hide from the world. And then of course there is this like shake it off and other side, which is what do you do? What do you tend to think, feel, and do when you feel powerful? Or if victim was on one side of that page, then creator, right? When you're in like flow creator mode, what do you tend to think, feel, and do? And something I noticed when somebody led me through this exercise was that when I'm in powerless mode, I tend to have this thought of like, what are the rules? Why can't I figure out the rules? The puzzle pieces aren't fitting together. Why can't I figure out the puzzle pieces? What's wrong with me? When I'm in powerful mode, I'm like, the rules were never meant for me.
Totally. Yes.
The rules. Oh, hello, rules. Let me question you. And so I almost can diagnose whether I'm in powerless or powerful. It's pretty obvious otherwise, right? But like, if I notice that I'm like, oh, why can't I figure this out? Which is a version of imposter syndrome, that it's going to do things to my body. It's going to, I am not a creator in that mode. I should not sit down and write my book in that mode, right? I should not work on my next project in that mode. And just noticing it's a mode, right? Rather, it's not like, why. If we start asking the why question of like, why do I get this way about it? The answer is our society. It's not us. Like, the question is how? How did I get here? How do I get out?
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. I like that exercise. I do think we should assign it as homework and have everyone report back to us.
Report back, and don't make my discovery be your discovery.
I've heard you recently started teaching fifth graders, so right?
I did get involved. My kid's school. I think we were just talking about this off air. My kid's school is doing a whole unit on activism, and the teacher asked me and a few other parents, including one woman who ran for state assembly, to come in. So we came in this morning, and listen, those fifth graders are ready to go.
We've talked a lot about the feminine voice and the power from females and how important it is as we address an audience of both men and women, that there is room here for men to understand themselves as well through the lens of understanding the women that they love in their lives. And I want to talk about, you even had notes in the book about like men being conditioned to go towards superhero voice. And of course, in this culture of what is becoming more and more obsessed with toxic masculinity, like superhero voice sounds like probably not a helpful reinforcer. Right? Like, what is that?
I just love, right? I noticed this back when I was working exclusively with actors, but a lot of men, and especially if they were British to sound American or English as a second language, their way of like hiding that they were non-Native American speakers was usually to go down in pitch. Okay, again, the internet tells you that's how you sound powerful. So, right, to go down in pitch, but to such a degree that you no longer have any pitch variation because it's all stuck in your throat. So you sound like this, and everybody sounds like this. And you're like, well, I don't know, Mike. And I'm like, that's how Batman sounds. And Batman sounds that way because he's supposed to be phased by, as I say in the book, phased by nothing. Cool. So look, I'm not here to like single-handedly detoxify our culture, but I will say that not necessarily in our tiny moments, in our office politics, right? We can all work that stuff out. It's complicated, and there's a lot of factors that each of you know more about than I do for your environment, right? But in the moments that matter, when we have the chance to talk in front of a bunch of people or turn a camera on and make a video, or pitch our idea in a boardroom, or pitch our, product to some VCs who could be holding the purse strings to our future. This is where getting out of our throats and getting out of our mode of hiding will make all the difference. And that is hard to believe in a culture that has told us otherwise our whole lives.
Yeah.
And this is often when I offer, like, okay, here's another exercise. Oh my God, the homework is mounting. But start to notice who you love listening to, who you admire, not just what they say, but how they say it, how they show up. And maybe it's like a one-off speech that goes viral, right? Maybe it's somebody at a town hall or an activist or a politician or somebody who wins a, Grammy. And there's like this speech that's just like weirdly emotional, like unusually so, and just moves people, and it has a moment, right? Yeah. But maybe it's not even that. Like maybe it's how your grandma talks, how she shows up, right? Oh my God, my grandmother turns 102 today.
Happy birthday.
Oh my God, I have to call her right after this.
Happy birthday. You absolutely call her right now. Make it podcastable.
Hold on. Bless. Shout out to my grandma. but really starting to notice, who do I love listening to? Because often that voice in our head that goes, oh, I don't dare show up anyway, except generic. That's our, fear, and that's our ego.
Yeah.
And both of those parts of us can be somewhat quieted by evidence. Our brains need evidence. But if you start to think about, an early like thought for me in this whole process was I watched the TED Talk of Jane Goodall, right? The woman who lived with
gorillas.
apes.
Yeah. Or apes. Wait, apes or gorillas? Why do I not know this?
Whatever. Is ape the like a super category
Ape
and
is
gorillas
gorilla.
is inside of it?
I should know this.
The pre-human.
Do gorilla tracking in our company.
Pre-humanoids. Amazing. That's amazing. Wait, that's a whole other podcast. So I watched this TED Talk of hers, and my dad's a scientist, so I see that she's a scientist. And I know culturally that scientists are sort of supposed to show up a certain way, that if you get emotional or if you're sort of soft, that you fear you will, quote unquote, lose credibility. And yet here she is. And I thought, she's actually performing. I don't mean performing in some way that sounds fake, but she's like showing for us a new sound of power. If the standard we just, lovingly name the old sound of power, and the idea of the old sound of power is that it kind of sounds one way. That's how those standards work. The new sound of power, my invitation is that you start to fill in, well, what does the new sound of power sound like? Who do you feel like is showing up that way? And how many different ways are there to show up as the new sound of power? Working with those fifth graders this morning. This kid was like, last year when I was only 9, I went to the city hall because they had this open thing where people could talk about, whatever, some environmental thing. And he's like, and I felt so nervous because I was only 9. And I was like, totally. And for every grown-up listening, right? We all feel nervous because we're only.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And then you can fill in the blank. What we can totally name the ways that our identity is not, the straight white rich man, and name that our weakness. Or we can go, how is the way that I sound a reflection of the life I've actually lived, that I am proud of?
Yes.
Or that I'm working to be proud of? And how do I show up unapologetically as somebody whose sounds reveal a life?
We've been focusing so much on I and me and us, but I'm also thinking, as you shared that story with me before we started recording, as we think about the fact that we're both moms, you with your son, I have 2 daughters, how do we pass this on to the next generation? Because like the time is now, this needs to happen. What is it that we're instilling in them so that our daughters do not naturally reach the age where, I think you had it in the tone chapter, you talked about the, they changed the pitch of their voice to start having people pleasing, essentially, right? Like you could actually study the age in which a girl's voice is changed to become more obligatory. And so we're like, what do we do with that? How do we parent? How do we raise the next generation differently with this?
I have 2 answers, I think.
Okay.
But it's a work in progress, right? Like we get to like, it's a co-creation. The answer to your question is a co-creation, right? But I have 2 answers that come to mind. One is, let them. Because there is an element of learning all of that stuff that is about navigating the real world. But let them do it from a point of view, and this is for all of us, but also especially, for our kids, from the point of view of how you're talking is doing what to that person. So that we have a sense of agency. I notice that sometimes I go up in my pitch when I'm talking to this person. I wonder what that's doing. I wonder why, right? I wonder why.
Yeah.
This is so much more powerful than either feeling trapped in it or not noticing it, right? That's so interesting, right? The observation.
Yes.
Ooh, because look, we humans have the capacity, clearly, both vocally and psychologically, and in our bodies and in our breath. We have the capacity to switch up how we sound based on who we're around and what vibe we're picking up. So not going, you're doing that wrong, but going, wow, what is that? What is it about that person that's making me feel like they need me to sound this way if they're going to listen to me? Ooh, that's interesting.
That's so good, because it's the parallel recommendation that Brene Brown has of your emotions of, look at these like a scientist, right? Become curious, turn them around, poke at them and make it, and that removes the shame.
Totally. Totally. And actually puts in place of it a celebration.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm versatile. Wow, I'm versatile.
Yeah.
Wow, look what I did to get by in that room.
Incredible.
That's my first thought. And my second one is simpler even, actually, which is every chance I have to talk to kids, including today, I'm like, P.S., you're the new sound of power. Because like, actually, we just need to be told that we don't always have to chase the old sound. I have to try to sound like someone else if I want, right? We're going to actually change the world at scale when all of us who are actually the new sound of power just claim that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Just claim that. Because so many people in charge in so many industries that we can all agree are broken. Not necessarily bad people, right? But so many people in charge, I think, and this is a weird thing to say because you're going to have never heard anyone say this, I think are partly in charge, voted in or promoted up because they sounded the part.
Mm.
And we need a reckoning with what sounding the part has done.
That means
because
too.
sounding the part does not mean you deserve to be in power.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so all of us, including our kids who are on like a fairness, justice, like journey, we get to look at Jane Goodall and be like, I can show up soft and I can show up humanist and I can get a little misty.
Mm-hmm.
And I can still be inside of curiosity and not have all the answers. And my sentences can go up a little bit at the end sometimes because going down suggests I am closed for debate.
Yeah.
And I can like breathe with people and feel things and connect and call that leadership.
Yeah. And that fights against this whole idea of, you talk about it in the book about adultism. And how basically we create these effects as well, not just because of society, but also because of our age, as we become to a certain point where we should be more serious because that earns us money and we need money to survive and we're doing what we can to survive, that almost shuts down the ability to change because it makes us kind of more stuck in our ways and more certain. And so I feel like this advice, it's not just for kids, right? It's kind of for all of us.
Oh, yeah. Adultism is this amazing term created by a woman named Nancy Luna Jimenez, who has a think tank in Pacific Northwest somewhere. And I interviewed her. She's so brilliant. But one of the things that she said, this idea of adultism, she thinks is sort of the root cause of all the other isms, all the other, ways in which we feel trapped by oppression.
Yeah.
And she, as she puts it, it stems from this idea that all of us as kids were told by our teachers and our parents and our society to grow up, to stop being free. And that our parents especially do this out of love, right? They're trying to safeguard us against being the weirdo.
Yeah.
And they don't realize that they're, adding to a culture that is not allowed to be a kid when they're a kid, but also like doesn't take, as you sort of put it, like silliness seriously once you're older. Like the idea of delight, so much of my work, actually the practical side of it, when I'm like in actual, coaching and strategy work with people, is often about something kind of viscerally simple, which is how do you talk about what you care about like you care about it? And I think this connects to adultism because what have we been told since we were, a kid in grade school? Well, you're a little weird. You're a little overenthusiastic. Be chill. Shh, calm down.
Calm down.
Whoa. Right?
Yeah.
So we're told really early on, whether it's anger or sadness or enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Your emotional life is too much.
Mm.
And then here we are as grownups trying to pitch our brilliant idea. And we're like, but whatever, like, it's cool.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's a learned behavior to hide our care.
Yeah.
Or the alternative, the other extreme, which is a different form of hiding, which is what you discussed earlier, which is overcaring, pretending that you care when you don't, because customer service voice, because the ways in which we've been socialized to be like, oh yeah, wow, oh that's so wow, right? And you're like, on the one hand, right? If we're imagining a spectrum, on the one hand, undercaring, right? It's cool, whatever. Like it's fine.
Yeah.
Right. We get in our throat.
I didn't really want it.
No, yeah, like whatever. Right. Come on, so understandable. My heart goes out, right? But like not a helpful way to show up when you're saying something that matters to you. And then on the other hand is the pushing, the overcaring. So what I want to talk about it, right, which can come across as something that makes people lean back.
Yeah.
So the sweet spot in the middle, this is hard to find, right? This is something we do get to practice, by the way, with our friends. Like catch yourself when you're talking to your favorite people around whom you do not feel like you have to put on an act or prove yourself. When you just have some ridiculous, like, oh my God, you'll never guess who I just ran into at Starbucks. And you'll find out what you sound like, right? And you don't have to care. It doesn't have to be a care like this is my life's work, although that's fine too.
Right.
But it can just be a care like this moment like rocked me. I have not seen them since before the pandemic. And can you believe what happened? And right?
Yeah.
Notice that version of you. By the way, hard to notice those moments because those are often when we're the least self-conscious. So I'm asking you to sort of catch a moment when you're otherwise not catching yourself.
Yeah.
But like, hi, who's that person? What would she be like in a pitch?
Probably pretty compelling.
Ooh, here's something I care about. Shall we care about it together?
How fascinating that we have to learn, right? Because it's all about us. Actually, we have to unlearn.
It's both. Yeah, exactly. Because of the socialization completely. And I think you're right. I mean, I think part of why I say I'm on an anti-shame campaign is just because like, let's just love on the fact that we've all been socialized. Like we're not going to unbe socialized, but now what, but now what next?
Now that we know, how do we do better? I could talk to you about this all day long. And I wish we did have all day long to talk about it, but we don't, which is why I just simply recommend someone pick up your book because it is so good and wonderful.
Thank you.
I want to direct them to follow along with you as well. Where do people stay in touch? Where do they follow Samara and what's next?
I am launching a Substack. You can be part of the community. It's called How to Show Up with Samara Bay.
Okay. Tell us
more.
more.
And find it on Substack.
Okay. What, how to show up? I like that, can you give us any more details on the,
the thing over at Substack is that it's like, I've just got indoctrinated into the wonders of Substack. I was just
this is why I'm asking. I'm actually very new to it.
I was living in this world where I thought Substack was just like blogging from the 90s. And I was like, I'm good, thanks.
Yeah.
And then actually Shannon Watts, who is this incredible activist who started Moms Demand, and it has like 10 million, followers to the cause now, and has impacted legislation at all levels. She's amazing and such a woman supporting women. And she totally pulled me aside and was like, why are you not on Substack? I'm going to introduce you to people over there that are going to explain the whole thing to you. So now I have the whole explanation, and it really is, it's a community for writers, but also obviously for readers. And because I'm going to make it a little sideways. It's not just like my musings on something. It really is like guidance and tips and vulnerable truths that I have discovered about how to show up, by which I mean the permission to speak side of it, but also, what I'm really interested in these days that I don't think we talk about enough. How do you hold on to a vision or a belief before other people see it? This is how all movements, but also all businesses get made.
Yeah.
And the actual daily practice of believing your thing when there isn't enough evidence for other people to like be throwing you millions of dollars is actually going to impact whether or not your thing becomes a thing.
Yeah.
And So I'm going to start gathering conversations around this, and that's
Please
going to
gather
live over
conversations.
them.
I love that. Well, that speaks a lot to the entrepreneurial journey in particular, because I mean, there's a reason that a lot of narcissists and psychopaths and et cetera are entrepreneurs, because oftentimes I say like I just categorize myself into that.
I noticed that.
Like there's that natural thing where you're like, well, no one's going to believe this, but like a lot of entrepreneurs are like, no, I mean, they're going to believe it because I believe it. So it's an interesting thing to think about. The hesitation,
but also
the reason we hesitate.
Yes. Look, we need that confidence. We need the delusions of grandeur. And then also like, are they delusions? Question mark.
Maybe.
And how much is delusions of grandeur a good strategy? But also like, let's be honest, because, there is a social justice component to this whole conversation. Like that level of confidence in yourself is not doled out evenly.
No, it is not.
I mean, this is why like the bros are the bros.
Yes.
And so for all the rest of us, we get to be like, what would it be to walk into a room being like, thank God for them that I am here?
How do I show up?
Yeah.
Hence
how do I
the
show
name.
up?
Okay. Substack. We will absolutely link to that in the show notes. Make sure people know exactly where to find you on that.
Yeah.
And before we part, I always like to ask people, what is one thing that made you smile today?
I mean, those fifth graders.
Mm-hmm.
This boy who was cool. He was like a cool kid. Afterwards was like, can I ask a question? And of course I was like, well, of course. What do you want to know? He was so cute. And then he said, I would love advice on what to do about sea life because I care about the ocean and I'm worried about the fish. And I'm worried that there's nothing that I could personally do. And he started to get teary in this way that was shockingly unapologetic. And then he said, I'm very sentimental. I was like, please don't ever change.
No.
And let's think about the skills you have and the ways that you can use the things you do and the things you love to do good in the world. That tends to be the best way. Right. Of course, you can like have your parents Google, what are ways that kids can get involved and like go down to a beautification project by the beach. Totally. Also good.
Yeah.
But he was like, do you think animation would help? Oh my God, that's a direct quote. I was like, yes, I think animation would. Are you an animator? Yes, please. Do you have a YouTube channel? Kids these days. Anyway.
That's incredible.
That made me smile.
I love that smile. And I love how often it has made you smile since you told me about it at the beginning of the conversation. I was hoping it would find its way in here. So thank you for sharing that story.
I also asked for consent and then gave him a really big hug because I was like, you're just like standing in a classroom crying about the ocean. We should all be crying about the ocean. Thank you for showing up for humanity.
Les, I love it. Well, thank you for showing up for humanity and the work that you're putting out there. It is wonderful, and we are grateful for you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Samara. And that, lovely listeners, brings us to the end of today's episode. We truly hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of leadership and professional development with Who Made You the Boss. If you've gained some valuable insights today, we would love to hear from you. Please take a moment, go to your favorite podcast platform, search for Who Made You the Boss, and leave us a 5-star rating and review. That feedback helps us tremendously as we're creating content that resonates and empowers. Stay connected with us too by visiting lindsayepperly.com, and there you can subscribe to our newsletter and ensure you never miss an episode or an exciting update. You can connect with me personally as well on Instagram and LinkedIn, and let's continue the conversation with ourselves and other like-minded individuals who are redefining what it means to be the boss of our own lives. So thank you, listeners, for being a part of this journey. And until next time, remember, you have the power to shape your destiny. So keep leading, keep learning, and most importantly, keep being the boss of your own incredible story.